I've been listening to your videos a lot recently. I've always been a believer in unseen beings, and I've always had a love of fairies, but I hadn't actually started to learn about them until now. In fact, I feel like I have actually met a few of these creatures, strangely enough. I didn't realize it before, but now I really do think that what I encountered were possibly fairies. The experience that sticks out most to me was when I visited Savannah, Georgia last year in the spring. You see, I was there for a college visit with my mom. I'd been college hopping quite a while, and we were hopeful that this college would be the perfect one. When we pulled up to the Airbnb, the first thing I noticed was how hidden away the street felt. Yeah, it was in the city, but it just felt so disconnected from the rest of it. Apartments were overgrown with ivy, and the trees created almost a canopy over old historic buildings. Since it was spring, many of the flowers were in bloom, giving it an enchanted feeling. The second thing I noticed was the big black cat sitting on the porch of our Airbnb, just staring at us. When we got to the door, we were pleasantly surprised by his affectionate greetings. He weaved between our legs, purring loudly, meowing and chirping. Although this was without a doubt adorable, it was also incredibly odd to me. I'm no stranger to the behavior of cats, as I've always had them around as I was growing up. I've had 3 of them, and in the past I've also fed strays and my neighbor's cats. Every cat I've ever met, with or without owners, were always wary of people that they didn't know. Even the friendlier ones would cautiously keep their distance before getting snuggly. But not this cat. No, he was nothing but charm and confidence as he introduced himself to us. Nothing about him spoke of fear to me. I asked my mom if he could belong to the owner of the B&B. I saw that he had a collar and figured it was possible, but she shook her head. Apparently the owners didn't even live there, and they had a no pets rule. Clearly the cat didn't care about this rule in the least bit, since when we opened the door he just let himself inside. Now that I think about it, it was incredibly weird that my mom and I allowed this. While we're both cat people, it's not like us to knowingly go against rules like this at risk of a fine. But we did anyway. The cat also seemed to know that we were staying in the upstairs apartment, trotting up the stairs and scratching at the door. Yet again, we let him in. We just couldn't say no. However, I did have the sense to check his collar, since I noticed that he was wearing one. This was the only time he really gave me trouble, squirming around as I tried to make out the phone number of the owner. After all, I felt it was only right to let them know that their cat had let himself into our B&B and was chillin' here with us. Thankfully, I was able to reach the owner. When I told her about the situation, she actually laughed and told me the cat's name was Inky, and that this was a common occurrence, and that try as she might, she could never figure out how to keep him inside. He was just too clever. Time and again, he would slip out and befriend the neighbors and let himself into other people's homes. I wish he would just stay here and cuddle with me for longer, she sighed. But he's his own person. I'm less like his owner and more like his caretaker. When I asked if she wanted to come and pick him up, she told me no, and that he would come back whenever it was his time. So Inky stayed with us for a few hours, switching back and forth from cuddling with me to cuddling with my mom, always purring happily. He didn't seem to mind getting tummy rubs either, which I know some cats hate. He was just this happy, lanky, black fuzzball. Eventually, we figured that it was time for him to go, and we let him out. But the next day, after the campus tour, we found him yet again on the porch, waiting for us. It happened the next day too, and the next. He always seemed to know when we would be back, and made a point to be punctual about it. Even when we didn't see him at first, he was always close by, stepping out of these bushes right by the apartment. They weren't very thick, and I always wondered why I hadn't been able to spot him when we got to the apartment. The only time he didn't greet us was when it was time to leave. It actually hurt that he hadn't come to say goodbye, and I could tell that my mom felt the same way too. We stood outside our rental car calling for him for several minutes before giving up and accepting defeat. We couldn't force Inky to come. We couldn't force Inky to do anything. No one could. Perhaps he was upset with us for leaving. Nevertheless, I promised him I would be back someday soon. As the months went by, I would still think about him sometimes, but it has become less and less. I actually got accepted to the college that I was looking at in Savannah, and I'm taking online classes there until the virus ends and I can move on campus. It really did end up being the perfect college. That being said, I really haven't had time to think much about anything else other than schoolwork, so I hadn't thought about Inky for quite some time. That is, until I had a dream about him the other night. In the dream, I was in the woods by my house when I heard a familiar meow by my feet, and I looked down to see Inky. Except he was surrounded by a warm golden glow. Tears welling my eyes, I scooped him up and nuzzled my purring friend's head. The first words that came to my mouth were, "You found me!" And for some reason, it really did feel like he had been searching for me. I never remember my dreams so vividly, and when I do, they're normally nonsense dreams or nightmares. But this was peaceful and felt real. When I checked the date on my phone after waking up, I had also realized that it had been exactly a year since I had made my trip to Savannah. Now, obviously I don't know this for sure, but I just have this feeling that Inky might have been a fairy. 'Cause never in my life had I met a cat like that with such cleverness and human or beyond human intelligence. I don't think it was a coincidence that he showed up in my dream a year later either. Maybe he wanted to know why I hadn't returned yet like I said I would. Maybe he just wanted to say hi since I couldn't visit him myself. Maybe it's for some other reason outside of my understanding as a human. I live in Georgia. One night, a few years ago, I was standing outside in my yard on a set of concrete steps that leads to my back door, as was my normal routine. I'd put a lot of work into my yard to make it a relaxing place. I had outdoor torches, and I even carved some runes into the steps. So every evening, about 3 hours before I went to bed, I would stand outside, gather my thoughts, and take in the ambiance. But on this occasion, there was something unusual. I experienced a sudden chill, and my hair started prickling for no reason. Then I noticed movement in the far right corner of my backyard. That area had several wild hemlock bushes next to it, and an earthen mound about 1 foot high, 3 feet long, and 1.5 feet wide. I spotted something in the hemlock. At first, I was certain it was a stray cat. I could see its cat-like eyes and its fur, and I'm sure I saw the swish of a tail. I was worried the cat might be injured or stuck, but when I started to walk over to check it out, I realized that what I thought was a cat was actually a small figure standing there looking at me. It looked like a small person between 2 to 2.5 feet tall with a dark complexion. Surprised, I stopped cold, and after what was probably only a few seconds, I began to get this strong feeling that I was not safe. So I turned and headed back towards the steps. As I moved, I could hear the whatever it was following me. I became so alarmed, I broke out into a run. When I stepped past the cast iron torch holders and runes I had etched into the concrete, I felt like I was safe, but still I ran into the house and shut the door. My wife at the time asked what was wrong, and I told her what had happened. The next morning, I found impressions in the soft ground around the steps that were too small to be from me, and were where I had not stepped the night before. I don't know what that thing was, but fairy is the word that comes to mind. I think fairies are like humans, some good, some bad, and some indifferent. And, like humans, some you can trust, while others are dangerous. When I was in college, I moved into an apartment in Michigan with a couple of friends. At the time, I had already had a few supernatural experiences. I had lived in 2 different houses that I believed to be haunted, so I was somewhat familiar with the strange and unnerving things that can happen in an old house. But the things that happened in this apartment were different and stranger than anything I had experienced before. We had lived there only 2 days, and early that morning, I was woken by a persistent doorbell. Groggy, I threw on a robe and went to the door. There was a guy standing there. I don't really remember what he looked like, only that his hair was wet, like he had just gotten out of the shower. When he introduced himself as our downstairs neighbor, I assumed he was there to warn us about something. Why else would you knock on the door so early and still dripping from the shower? He also wore an unimpressed or sour look, like a cat that's just been given a bath. But there was no emergency and he wasn't upset. He said he just wanted to stop by and introduce himself. I thought this was weird, but I was polite. I told him my roommates were still sleeping, but if he stopped by later, he could meet them too. And he left. Later that morning, I asked my roommates if either of them had heard the doorbell ringing earlier, and neither of them had heard it. But I just assumed they'd slept through it. I told them that it had been the downstairs neighbor and he would probably stop by again later. Then one of my roommates gave me a weird look. She said there was no downstairs neighbor. The apartment below hadn't been rented. I thought she must have been mistaken, so I went downstairs and knocked on the door just to be certain. But no one answered, and I could hear no movement inside. The next morning, we found that all our shoes were full of water and long pieces of grass. Even a pair of flip-flops had as much water in them as was possible without it spilling over. But there was no water on the floor. We could find no explanation for this, and it only happened that one time. I never saw that guy again, not in the building or in the neighborhood, but strange things continued to happen in my apartment. My roommates and I started seeing cat-like shadows darting around the place very early in the morning, usually 2 or 3 at a time. After that, anytime someone was running late, and only when they were running late, their keys were nowhere to be found. Only after 15 minutes or so of searching would they appear in a highly visible place, usually where the keys were supposed to have been in the first place, and the first place we had checked. Plants grew insanely well in that house as well, growing many inches overnight and blooming more and more often than expected. They weren't fertilized, and we only watered them with tap water. I can't explain any of this. I can't think of any connection between that guy with the wet hair, the water in our shoes, and the cat shadows. I only know that ghosts don't seem like the right explanation. I thought of fairies because I know they can appear as cats, but I can't think of any connection with water. Is there such a thing as a cat kelpie? Regardless, it was a strange place, and I'll never forget the time I spent living there. When I got married in 2009, my husband, my fiance at the time, had a cat that absolutely hated me. This was a new experience for me because I'm a big animal lover, and normally I get along with pets of all kinds. I'd never had a cat or any kind of animal react this way to me before. My fiance joked that the cat was jealous of me. It was a female cat. Her name was Calypso, Callie for short. And I guess she had my fiance all to herself before I showed up. I tried everything to win over this cat. I tried playing with her. I bought her some cat toys, including one with catnip in it. She liked that one, but still didn't like me. I got her some tuna cat treats. Nothing changed. She would hiss at me, knock my things off tables, and once she even used the bottom of my jacket, which had been hanging over the back of a chair, as a scratching post. It was my favorite jacket, and I'm still not over that one. There was so much going on the week of the wedding. I had relatives coming in from out of town, and I was mostly organizing everything myself. There was a whole list of things to do, and one of them was to pick up my wedding dress from the tailor. My fiance offered to do it for me because I was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, and I agreed, but only if he promised not to look at it. It was kept in one of those big dress bags, so he would have had to unzip it to look inside. He promised. I dropped by his place a couple of days before the wedding to pick up the dress. At the time, my fiance was in the middle of making dinner. He told me I could find the dress hanging in the closet in the spare room. So I went to get it by myself. But before I walked into the room, I thought I heard some rustling coming from the other side of the door, which was slightly open. I pushed the door open all the way and saw my wedding dress lying in a heap on the floor. The cat was sitting right in the middle of the heap, right inside the open neckline area. It's like if the cat had been a human, it would have been wearing the dress. The cat hissed at me and I screamed. I ran for the dress and the cat darted under the bed, and my fiance came running all at the same time. I explained what had happened as I frantically inspected the dress for any damage. The dress seemed fine apart from some cat hair, but my fiance had no idea how it went from hanging in the closet to a pile on the floor. Granted, the closet door was open and the dress was lying right in front of the closet, but how did it get out of the dress bag? My fiance inspected the bag and realized the zipper was broken and had split apart all the way down the middle. So maybe the dress had fallen off the hanger and slipped out through the broken zipper? And maybe then the cat had decided it was a good place to take a nap? Maybe. The whole thing was just weird, though. Even weirder, a couple of weeks after the wedding, the cat went missing. My husband put up signs around the neighborhood to try and find her, but we never saw her again. I don't know what to think. Maybe Callie was just a jealous cat who couldn't handle her owner spending time with someone else. But I can't help wondering if there was something more to it. Like, maybe that cat was more than just a cat. I live in downtown Montreal. In the area where I live, there's a series of alleyways that connect to various streets, creating a network of shortcuts for those of us familiar with the area. It's pretty safe. I take the alleys often and probably spend more time in them than on the roads. There's this white cat that I sometimes see in one alley in particular. I don't think it's a stray. It looks healthy and well taken care of, though I never noticed a collar. There's an old house on the corner, at the entrance to the alley, and I've seen the cat on the porch steps or crawling along the wooden fence that separates that house from the alley. So I always assume that the cat belongs to whoever lives there. It's odd, though. I've never seen any people in or around that house, never seen a light on, never seen a car parked out front, or any evidence that anybody lives there. And yet, that house looks maintained. There aren't any weeds, there's never any snow on the porch in the winter. It looks taken care of. A lot like the cat, actually. But this isn't anything I noticed or paid much attention to, except in retrospect, which brings me to the incident in question. It was early November, unseasonably warm. There was no snow on the ground, and a foggy, misting rain hovered over the place. It was dark, around 11:30 p.m., and I was walking home from a friend's house. I was on the street, headed towards my shortcut down the alleyway, the one with the white cat and the house on the corner. There's a street light right in front of the entrance of the alleyway, and another on the far end, so it's pretty well lit. As I neared the alley, I noticed a shadow on the pavement being cast by the street light. The shadow very clearly belonged to a cat. It looked like the white cat was back again, and judging by the shadow, he was walking along the top of the wooden fence. At least, this was my assumption. But when I turned into the alleyway, I did not see a cat. I saw a person. A guy. Young, early 20s maybe? I don't remember anything remarkable about the way he looked or the way he was dressed. Dark pants and a jacket, I think. But he did have really light blonde hair. And he was walking along the top of the fence, which is weird in itself. I've never seen a grown man walking along the top of a fence like that. Come to think of it, I can't even remember seeing any kids doing that, not in the city. But weirder still, he was in the exact spot I had expected to see the cat based on the shadow. He stopped and looked at me and just stared at me. Actually, in that intense way that a cat stares at you. I was frightened. I didn't know what to do. I had that moment of indecision where I thought about turning around and taking the long way home. But I was already in the alley and my instincts took over. I looked away from him and just kept going forward, walking as fast as I could for the other end of the alley. I was listening intently the whole time for the sound of him jumping down from the fence, terrified he was going to chase after me. But I heard nothing. When I got to the end of the alley, I looked back, and he was gone. I don't understand how he could have jumped down from that fence without my hearing it. Granted, it wasn't exactly a very tall fence, but still, I should have heard something. It didn't make sense. I basically ran the rest of the way home. I haven't gone down that alley since then. Now I take the long way around, but sometimes I do still pass that house. And sometimes I see that white cat sitting on the porch or crawling along that same fence. And there have been a few times where the cat has stopped and stared at me in that way that cats do. But now, after seeing that guy, it just gives me the creeps. If I was braver, I'd investigate further. maybe go up to the cat and see if it would let me pet it, or even knock on the door to see if anyone lives there. But I'm not. I can't say I'm not curious. I know there's something weird going on with that house and that cat. But every instinct in my body is telling me to leave it alone, to stay away. And so I do. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed those. I have a quick announcement. I mentioned a long time ago that I was working on a fairy novel, and a few of you have been asking about it. It is finished. I'm just editing it now, but I still don't have a date when I'm actually going to release it, just because I'm still deciding whether to try to get it published traditionally or to self-publish. But as soon as I know more, I'll definitely give you an update. In the meantime, I've been experimenting with designing a simple lined journal and self-publishing that. I designed the cover and it has some quotes scattered throughout, just quotes from my videos. It's available now on Amazon, and if you pick one up, it's a great way to support the channel, and you'll get this little lined journal as well to record all your fairy experiences in. The link for that will be in the description, and I'll put one in the comments as well. This is my first time experimenting with self-publishing anything, but it was fun to do, and I'll probably put out a few more designs in the coming weeks or months. So if you don't like this design but still want to buy a journal to support the channel, you might want to hold off for now because you might like one of the future designs better. And of course, eventually there will be an actual novel, so I hope all of you will be interested in reading that. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of this video. Do you think you've encountered a cat she? I'd love to hear your stories. I'll be responding to comments and questions for the next hour or so. As always, special thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for the support you are giving this work. I really couldn't appreciate it more. If you like this content and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Even $1 a month really helps. You can also support the channel by clicking the join button below this video. The stories in the video came courtesy of subscribers and the fairy census. Thanks to everyone who submitted. Some of these stories from the census were edited just to make them more friendly for narration, but if you want to read the originals, the link to the census is in the description below. I'm always collecting your true fairy stories, so if you've got one, I'd love to read it. My email, also in the description. That goes for fairy art as well. If you have anything to share, please email it to me with fairy art in the subject line. Don't forget to comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.